Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV with Bob Weeks.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public policy. We're broadcast on KGPT Channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, The Voice for Liberty, at wichitaliberty.org. The motto there is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita and Kansas. So I cover things that may not be covered by other news media in Wichita and Kansas, or if we do cover the same news, I'll do it from the perspective of economic freedom, limited government, and individual liberty, because these are the things that are important. And these are the things that we find so often under attack by our governments, be it at the federal, state, or local level. So please visit wichitaliberty.org on the internet. You can subscribe to the email newsletter I send a couple times a week. You can like The Voice for Liberty on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, and if you want to contact me, you'll find my email address there at wichitaliberty.org, or just remember bob.weeks@gmail.com. Kansas held primary elections this week. The primary election, of course, does not determine who wins the office. It only selects one Democratic and one Republican candidate to move forward to the November general election. But in many cases, the primary is the election, at least the one that really makes a difference. That's because in Kansas, often there may be no Democratic Party candidate. Or if there is a Democrat, that candidate may have little money available to campaign in a district with a large Republican voter registration advantage. It's also important to note that some candidates who will appear on the general election ballot in November did not appear on any primary election ballot. That's because parties other than Democratic and Republican, they select their candidates in a nominating convention. In particular, there are two prominent candidates in this category. One is Keene Umbehr, the Libertarian Party candidate for governor, and the independent candidate Greg Orman, who is running for United States Senator. Both are serious candidates that deserve consideration from voters. But for now, let's take a look at a few results from the primary elections in Kansas this week. Now, in the contest for the Republican Party nomination for United States Senate, Pat Roberts, the incumbent, won, receiving 48% of the vote. He moves on to face not only the Democratic nominee, but also an independent candidate who is already advertising on television. Now, the problems Pat Roberts faces going forward is the fallout from his Scorched Earth campaign. He went negative against Milton Wolfe from the start, focusing on issues that are worth considering but quite trivial when we consider the big picture. And he ran an advertisement near the end of the campaign that took Milton Wolfe's words grossly out of context, and the Roberts campaign should be ashamed for stooping to that level. And another thing Pat Roberts can be ashamed of is his refusal to debate opponents. He said he would debate, and he should debate. It's a civic obligation, and he also largely avoided news media. Now, during the campaign, I was critical of Senator Pat Roberts. I looked at votes he had taken while in the Senate. I looked at the way he ran his campaign, and I was critical of that. And I hope that I kept my criticism based on and focused on facts and issues. But another problem Pat Roberts has is the behavior of his supporters, both official and unofficial. They, too, ran a Scorched Earth campaign. I'd like to show you some of the posts made on Facebook and Twitter about Wolfe and his supporters, but this is a family-oriented broadcast. And Pat Roberts, he's going to need the support of all Kansas Republicans in the general election. He needs to hope that they don't peel off to the Democrat or independent candidates. Roberts needs to hope that Kansas Republicans actually vote and vote for him. But the behavior of his campaign and its supporters has harmed Republican Party unity. And what's curious to me is that I really don't think they realize the harm that they have caused. Well, for United States House of Representatives in the 4th District, which is Wichita and the surrounding area, the incumbent Mike Pompeo won over Todd Tiahrt 63% to 37%. Now, this contest was curious for a number of reasons, such as the former holder of the office seeking it again and running against a man he endorsed for that office twice. It attracted national attention for that reason, but also for something more important. Todd Tiahrt was advocating for a return to the practice of the earmarking of federal spending. Tiahrt concentrated a few issues in a campaign that was negative from the start. He claimed that Mike Pompeo voted to support Obamacare 7 times. But everyone who examined that claim, including several political science professors, said it was unfounded, going as far as saying it broke the truth entirely. The Tiahrt campaign also took a speech that Mike Pompeo had made on the floor of the House of Representatives and used just one sentence of it in a deceptive manner. The campaign also took a bill that Pompeo introduced having to do with GMOs, genetically modified organisms, and twisted its meaning in order to claim that Mike Pompeo does not want you to know the ingredients used in food. Tiahrt also criticized Pompeo for missing some votes during the campaign, even though Tiahrt had missed many votes during his own campaign 4 years ago. Well, in the face of these negative ads, Pompeo remained largely positive. He released one television ad that rebutted the claims that Tiahrt had made. Is that negative campaigning, to rebut the false accusations of your opponent? Well, I don't really think so. And Pompeo also had one ad that mentioned goofy accusations made by his opponent, which hardly qualifies as negative too. But other than that, the Pompeo campaign remained largely positive, and that's quite an accomplishment in today's political environment. Well, that campaign was also marred by vitriol among supporters. In my opinion, based on my observations, the Tiahrt supporters that engaged in this behavior have some apologies to make. Well, Mike Pompeo goes on to face a relatively unknown Democrat in the heavily Republican 4th District. Now, for United States House of Representatives in the 1st District, which is western Kansas, although it does go east far enough to include Emporia and Manhattan, the incumbent Tim Huelskamp was challenged by Allen Law Police, and Huelskamp won that race with 55% of the vote. Now, Tim Huelskamp had faced criticism for not being supportive of the various subsidy programs that benefit farmers, most notably for ethanol. Outside groups joined the race, running ads critical of Huelskamp for that reason. Some ads were critical of Huelskamp for having been removed from the House Agricultural Committee, that move seen as retaliation for not supporting Speaker of the House John Boehner. Well, now Tim Huelskamp moves on to face a Kansas State University history professor who was also the mayor of Manhattan. Okay, so what do these results mean in these federal elections in Kansas? These 3 elections, Senate and 2 House contests, they all attracted national attention. And the Friday before the election, Kimberly Strassel wrote in the Wall Street Journal of the importance of the 4th District contest. She wrote, "A big decision comes Tuesday in the Kansas GOP primary. The Sunflower State is in the throes of political upheaval, with most of the attention on the fortunes of Governor Sam Brownback and Senator Pat Roberts. But the race that may say far more about the direction of the GOP is taking place in Wichita, the state's 4th District, in the standoff between Representative Mike Pompeo and challenger Todd Tiahrt. Pompeo was elected in the 2010 Tea Party surge with a particular focus on liberating private enterprise. He's made a name for himself as a leader in the fight to end corporate welfare and pork and to cut back on strangling regulations. And now, after detailing some legislative activity and accomplishment, Strassel noted the difficulty that fighters for economic freedom encounter. She wrote, Such principles are precisely what conservative voters claim to demand from their representatives. Yet, the anti-subsidy line has hardly been an easy one, even in conservative Kansas, which collects its share of federal largesse. And Mr. T knows that. And continuing, she wrote, "The choice voters fundamentally face on Tuesday is whether they want a congressman who works to get government smaller for everyone and to end corporate welfare, or a congressman who grabs what he can of big government to funnel to his district and embraces crony capitalism. The latter is a return to the unreformed GOP, a groove plenty of Republicans would happily slide back into if only voters give the nod. We'll see if Kansas conservatives do." Well, that's Kim Strassel in the Wall Street Journal, and I think there's something there that bears repeating. She wrote, "Such principles are precisely what conservative voters claim to demand from their representatives." And in the case of Tim Huelskamp and Mike Pompeo, voters supported two candidates who have these principles and who actually follow them. But in the United States Senate contest, that did not, but almost happen. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Well, we had local elections this week, too. 3 of the 5 positions on the Sedgwick County Board of Commissioners were up for election this year. Now, unlike the Wichita City Council, Sedgwick County Commissioners run as members of a party and compete in both primary and general elections, although there can be independent and third-party candidates, too. In one of the Sedgwick County Commission districts, the incumbent Republican ran unopposed. But in 2 other districts, there were spirited contests. In District 4, which covers north central and northwest Wichita, as well as Mays, Valley Center, and Park City, the incumbent Richard Ranzau was challenged by Carolyn McGinn. She had held this position in the past, and then served in the Kansas Senate, an office she still holds. Now, Richard Ranzau is well known, notorious we might say, for his tough line on spending taxpayer dollars. As far as the campaign goes, the McGinn campaign had about twice as much money to spend, and a lot of that came from the people we know as Wichita's crony capitalists. That is, people and companies who actively seek handouts from government. And the Wichita Metro Chamber of Commerce endorsed Carolyn McGinn. Now, you may think of your local Chamber of Commerce as pro-business, and the Wichita Chamber is pro-business, no doubt about that. But pro-business is not the same as pro-capitalism, and being pro-business is not the same as being in favor of economic freedom. Being pro-business is not the same as supporting a limited constitutional government that protects our freedoms and property rights. I want to elaborate a moment on this point. Just this week, Wichita's own Charles Koch wrote an op-ed for USA Today newspaper. After expressing concern for the weak economy and its effect on workers, he offered a plan forward. He wrote, "First, we need to encourage principled entrepreneurship. Companies should earn profits by creating value for customers and acting with integrity, the opposite of today's rampant cronyism." And concluding his article, Charles Koch wrote, "Our government's decades-long, top-down approach to job creation has failed. Its policies have made our problems worse, leaving tens of millions chronically or underemployed, millions of whom have given up finding meaningful work. And in doing so, our government has not only thwarted real job creation, it has also reduced the supply and quality of goods and services that make people's lives better and undermine the culture required to sustain a free society. When it comes to creating opportunities for all, we can do much better. It's time to let people seek opportunities that best suit their talents, for businesses to forsake cronyism, and for government to get out of the way. Now, Charles Koch, that in the USA Today newspaper, he was writing primarily about the United States government, but the same principles apply to local government. And Wichita's cronies, that is, those who seek profits through politicians and bureaucrats rather than customers, they lined up behind Carolyn McGinn in a big way. And by using their generous funding, she ran a negative campaign against Richard Ranzau. Now, he forcefully and truthfully responded to her negative ads, and I'm pleased to say that I helped in that effort. Well, so what was the result of the election? Well, the answer is Richard Ranzau won with 50% of the vote. He now moves on to face Democrat Melody McRae Miller in the November general election. She, like Carolyn McGinn, held this county commission before, and she also served in the Kansas legislature in the House of Representatives. Well, there was a contest in District 5, which is Derby and parts of southeast Wichita. The one-term incumbent, Jim Skelton, declined to run for election. And the two Republican candidates were Jim Howell and Diane Avello. Howell has represented parts of Derby in the Kansas House of Representatives for 4 years, and Avello has been mayor of Derby for many years. The Wichita Chamber endorsed Howell in this race, and campaign funds were closer in this race, with Howell having a small edge. And the result was Jim Howell winning with 63% of the vote. And he moves on to face the Democrat in the general election, which is former Rose Hill Mayor Richard Young. Okay, so what do the results of these two local elections mean? Well, first, there may be a potential shift of power on the Sedgwick County Commission. Currently, Commissioners Ranzau and Carl Peterjohn are often in a minority of 2 against the other 3 commissioners. It's thought that if Howell is elected, he would often join Ranzau and Peterjohn to form a working majority of 3. That could cause a change in policy at the county commission, and that's something that the Wichita Chamber of Commerce and Wichita cronies don't want. It will be interesting to see who the Chamber and the cronies support in the general election, Ranzau or the Democrat. In 2008, when Carl Peterjohn ran for his first term on the Sedgwick County Commission, the Wichita Chamber campaigned against him, making it the most important priority in their decision, that being the defeat of Carl Peterjohn. Now, in particular, Richard Ranzau's victory is a defeat for the Wichita Chamber of Commerce. Besides endorsing Carolyn McGinn, the Chamber made independent expenditures in her favor. And I think this has even broader implications than just one county commission district. This week, the Wichita City Council voted in favor of placing a sales tax issue on the November ballot. Now, we've covered the details of that before on Wichita Liberty TV, and we'll certainly be talking about it again over the next few months. But for now, note that the Wichita Chamber is strongly in favor of the sales tax in Wichita, and I would expect to see the Chamber devote a lot of resources campaigning for its passage. Now, Richard Ranzau, on the other hand, is opposed to the sales tax increase. And while his county commission district encompasses a lot of territory that is outside of the city of Wichita, and it's only Wichita voters who will decide the sales tax issue, I think we can safely conclude that his victory paints a gloomy forecast for approval of the sales tax. And look even farther to the future. Ranzau's county commission district overlaps part of Wichita City Council District 5. That is currently represented by Jeff Longwell, and he can't run again because of term limits. Jeff Longwell is firmly in the grasp of Wichita's cronies. Could Richard Ranzau's victory pave the way for a fiscally conservative city council candidate in District 5? Well, that election will be next spring. And also next spring, Wichita will elect a new mayor. There are many names mentioned as candidates, including Longwell. What do the victories of Ranzau and Howell mean? What impact will the sales tax campaign and the result of that election have on the spring elections? Well, the Wichita Chamber and the Wichita cronies campaigned hard for Carolyn McGinn against Richard Ranzau. Well, I should clarify. They spent a lot of money on the campaign. Richard Ranzau himself, his family, and his volunteers worked hard. And I think that the desire for economic freedom by Richard Ranzau and his volunteers was a more powerful force than the greed of the Wichita Chamber of Commerce, Key Construction, David Burke, and Bill Warren. Keep this in mind. The Sedgwick County Commission has very little power to initiate the type of economic development incentives that the Wichita Chamber and the cronies want. That power rests almost totally at the Wichita City Council and the Kansas Department of Commerce. Also, the Sedgwick County Commission has limited power to stop or object to incentives. Their main voice is the ability to cancel the formation of a tax increment financing or TIF district. So if the Chamber and the cronies are willing to intervene to such extent in the campaign for a county commissioner, think what they will be willing to do in city council or mayoral contests if they see that their grip on the really big cookie jar might be in doubt. And since the departure of Michael O'Donnell for the Kansas Senate, there's really been no one on the Wichita City Council who questions anything the Chamber and the cronies want. Well, not in any serious manner, that is. We see council members making false displays of pretense now and then, but that's really all they do. These are important issues. Between now and the spring, with the November elections and then the city council elections, we'll learn a lot about the future direction of Wichita. I urge you to inform yourself on these important matters. On Wichita Liberty TV and on the internet at wichitaliberty.org, I'll do my best to help you do just that. Well, thank you for watching Wichita Liberty TV this week. I'm Bob.